The winter of 1352 turned the valleys of the Hida province into a graveyard. Snow fell on corpses left unburied, their limbs stiff in the white silence. Hunger took more than the plague that had already emptied most homes. In a village buried, at the edge of the forest, Ren, a thin boy of 13, helped tie the legs of his dead younger brother with scraps of hemp before dragging him to the river. He didn't cry. There was no strength left for it, only silence and wind. 3 days later, the men came, soldiers of the northern warlord, Takamura. Their boots crushed snow and bone alike as they entered the village. They didn't need food. They came for bodies. Ren, along with a dozen others, was pulled from homes or fields. The old were killed outright. Children were inspected like livestock. Most were deemed useless and discarded. But when Ren was shoved to his knees before a mounted officer, the man stepped back. He stared. Someone whispered to the commander. There was a pause, then the order, "Bring this one." The rest of the children screamed as they were led away to who knows where. Ren remained silent as they dragged him into a palanquin lined with furs and cloaked incense. The warlord Takamura waited inside his hilltop fortress, a man said to speak to ghosts. They brought Ren before him, bruised and half-starved. The boy did not understand the words being spoken around him, about eyes, posture, fate. The daimyo knelt, cupped Ren's chin with both hands, and stared as if searching for someone beneath the skin. Ren dared not breathe. Then the daimyo said one word. Kiku's servant scrubbed Ren's skin with rice husks until it bled. They burned his village rags and dressed him in robes of pale lavender silk. His hair was combed until the lice were gone and perfumed with camellia oil. He was made to sit for hours without moving while painters and tailors took his measure. No one asked him his name. No one allowed him to speak. They told him he would now be called Kiku, after the late Lord Takamura's son, who had burned alive 2 winters ago when a lantern fell in the castle's east wing. The boy's ashes had been scattered in the temple grove, but his memory remained on now. It had found flesh. The priest said it was a divine omen. The child's soul had returned to correct the karmic imbalance. Takamura, once known for his cruelty in battle, now spoke of penance and restoration, and Kiku became the instrument of that belief. The days turned strange. Kiku was never allowed outdoors. He was not a prisoner. He was something more delicate, more controlled. Every step had to be graceful. His hands were softened with rice paste. His voice was trained to stay low, steady, and sweet. At night, he slept on silk mats beneath wall hangings painted with lotus blossoms and cranes. But he dreamt of the riverbank, of snow piled over his brother's bones. Servants came and went, none making eye contact. One old woman touched his cheek once and whispered, "You don't know who you are anymore, do you?" She was gone the next day. A tutor was assigned to instruct him in court etiquette. He taught the boy how to bow without disrespect, how to recite tanka poetry with soft inflection, how to dance without drawing attention to the body. But it was never enough. Once, Kiku smiled with teeth, and the tutor struck him across the face. "He never showed his teeth," the man muttered. "Never." They brought out paintings of the dead son, formal portraits, grainy temple sketches. Kiku studied them, mirrored their expressionless grace. His reward was survival. And still, it was never perfect. On the 7th day, he was summoned to the inner hall, where Lord Takamura sat behind incense smoke and gold screens. The daimyo stared, saying nothing. After a long silence, he asked, "Do you remember me?" Kiku did not know how to answer. He had forgotten the sound of his own voice, so he bowed. The daimyo smiled, and it chilled him more than snow. That night, Kiku wasn't given supper, not as punishment, just forgotten. By the end of the month, his old life, his name, his family, the cold soil of his village felt like fragments of another world. He was praised for his posture, for the soft sadness in his eyes. No one saw the confusion there, only the shadow of someone else. In time, Kiku learned to stop looking in mirrors. What stared back was not a boy. It was a shrine of breathing, relic for others to worship, control, mourn through. Once, he tried to ask where the other village children had gone. A servant pressed a finger to his lips, then mimed a blade across her neck. The voice in Kiku's head whispered louder each day. You are not real. You are memory in skin. And so, he smiled when asked. He bowed when called. He no longer missed his name. He had learned his first lesson. In this place, the only way to live was to disappear. The walls were painted with cranes and clouds, but the air reeked of mold and smoke. The corridors were always damp, even in summer, the stone sweating with silence. Kiku woke each morning to the clack of wooden sandals and the metallic rattle of keys. A bell rang twice. That meant water. Another bell, prayer. Another, training. There were no windows in his chamber, just sliding screens with paper too thick for light to pass through. Time existed in routines, not sunrises. Each morning, Kiku knelt while attendants poured cold water over him and scraped his skin with cloths until it flushed red. He was not allowed to wash himself. Every inch of him had to be made clean by others. Purity had become ceremony. He didn't speak unless addressed directly. He learned quickly every mistake had consequence. Meals were taken in silence. A small bowl of millet, gruel, pickled radish, sometimes dried fish, if offerings were high that week, sometimes nothing. A servant once whispered that famine had returned outside the castle walls. Peasants were boiling grass again. But here, hunger wasn't punishment, it was refinement. Emptiness was part of beauty. Hollow cheeks, pale skin, light steps. He was made to walk barefoot through the hallways, pausing at each doorway to bow. A single misstep earned a smack from a lacquered fan across the back. The older women who watched him had once been dancers or courtesans, now twisted by time and resentment. They dressed him in thin silks that exposed more than they hid. They powdered his face and shaped his eyebrows. Every layer of fabric was a layer of control. He learned to sing court poems, but not in his voice. He had to mimic the late sun's tone, a soft, distant echo. At night, he was made to perform before an audience of monks, retainers, and silent nobles. They watched him like they watched a puppet show. Applause never came. That would break the illusion. Etsuko, the eldest concubine, was the only one who dared speak without permission. Her hands were scarred from decades of service, her voice rough. She called him pretty ghost when no one was listening. She didn't smile when she said it. She knew what he was becoming. Once, she whispered, "They will use your body until your face changes. Then you'll be forgotten." The other girls kept their distance. They knew he wasn't truly one of them. Not a girl, not a boy, something in between. A vessel, a memory. They glanced at him with a mix of pity and fear. He slept alone in a room perfumed with incense that never burned out. A bronze mirror hung above his bedding, but he never looked into it. He couldn't. He knew what it would show. Not Ren, not even Kiku. Just an empty shape with someone else's face. The guards outside his chamber never spoke, but they watched closely. Once, he tried to whisper to a servant who looked kind. She was removed by the end of the day. The next day, a monk came to purify him with ritual incense and chants. The ceremony took hours. He knelt through all of it, head bowed, throat dry, eyes burning. He was told the gods needed him untainted, unquestioning. The days blurred. He memorized the calendar of ceremonies, the equinox prayers, ancestor offerings, the birthday of the dead boy he was forced to embody. On that day, he had to wear a white kimono and sit silently in the main hall while Lord Takamura placed offerings before a portrait. No one looked at Kiku directly. He was meant to be present, but invisible. A soul, not a person. He overheard servants whispering one night. They said the Lord rarely spoke anymore, that he was obsessed with omens. that he visited the temple twice a day asking for signs. They said the last concubine to displease him had vanished. Some said she had been given to the monks. Others believed worse. The priest assigned to Kiku grew more severe. He demanded longer hours of training. He taught obedience as salvation. He spoke of divine design, of karma and rebirth, of the burden of sacred roles. When Kiku hesitated during one recitation, the priest pressed a candle flame close to his arm. "Scenes must be cauterized," he said. "Kik, you didn't scream." He bit his tongue and bowed deeper. He began to forget the names of the trees in his village. He couldn't remember his mother's voice clearly anymore. Only the rhythm of chants and footsteps remained in his head. Even Nobu, the mute kitchen boy who once slipped him dried sweet potato, had vanished without explanation. The silences grew heavier. One evening, after hours of kneeling in the prayer room, his legs gave out. He collapsed face first. No one moved to help him. The priest said, "Even illusions must learn discipline." He was left there until the candles burned out. In those hours on the cold floor, he counted his breaths to stay conscious. He remembered the frozen river where his brother's body floated. He remembered hunger, not the refined kind, but the kind that gnawed your bones. And yet here, in the heart of power, surrounded by silk and gold, it was colder. There were no screams in this place, no open violence, just rules, rituals, boundaries drawn in silence. He was not allowed anger, not allowed sorrow, only performance. Once, during a private audience with Lord Takamura, the daimyo reached out and touched Kiku's cheek gently. He murmured, "My son had a scar on his temple. You do not. But your eyes, they are his." Kiku didn't reply. He kept his head lowered. When the daimyo stood and left, he felt nothing. Not fear, not pity, nothing. That was when he realized he had no one to miss. No one who knew his real name. No one who would say it aloud if he vanished tomorrow. He was not alive in the way others were. He was an echo, an object of belief wrapped in flesh, and belief was cruel. It didn't care if he hurt. It only cared that he stayed the same. The summer arrived late, heavy with rot. Rain fell in sheets for weeks, and the castle's lower chambers filled with stink. The servants walked through ankle-deep water in the kitchens. Rats crawled over grain sacks. Even the shrine incense couldn't mask the mildew. But worse than the damp came the sickness. It began with coughs, then boils, then silence. The fever struck one of the senior concubines, first Haru, a woman known for her distant smile and long black hair. She was removed overnight. The next morning, her chamber was cleaned with ash and vinegar. By evening, her name was no longer spoken. Kiku wasn't allowed near the others. He was confined to his room. A guard pushed trays of food inside with long bamboo poles. His linens were no longer changed. His hair went unwashed. The scent of rot crept into every layer of fabric. He waited in silence, hour after hour. No voice called his name. No hand reached for his wrist. The routines he had once despised, the dressing, the lessons, the surveillance were gone. In their place, only absence. And in that absence, memory returned. The forest, the river, his brother's body. The boy he once was stirred faintly, but the chains of habit held him still. After a week, a monk came. He didn't speak. He burned dried herbs and left a folded note. On it, only one word: remain, a command or a threat. Kiku couldn't tell. Then the dreams began. Not visions, but memories, twisted by hunger and silence. He saw his village burning. He saw his mother, eyes open in the snow. He saw Lord Takamura kneeling in a shrine, chanting his dead son's name while blood ran from his eyes. And always, he woke to darkness and the sound of dripping water. A few days later, he was summoned. The guards did not speak. They brought him through unfamiliar corridors, parts of the castle, long unused, with spiderwebs thick in corners. He was brought to a small chamber, lit with a single oil lamp. Lord Takamura waited alone. The man looked different, thinner, pale. His robes were wrinkled, his eyes yellowed with sleeplessness. He stared at Kiku for a long time, then spoke. "You've changed." Kiku said nothing. "You don't smile the same way. The angle is wrong." Silence. Takamura's voice trembled, low and bitter. Even ghosts forget themselves if left too long in flesh. He stood and approached, close enough for Kiku to see the veins in his neck pulsing. Then he struck him just once, open palm across the face, not out of rage, but disappointment. "You are not him." Kiku remained, kneeling as blood dripped from his lip. He said the only thing that might preserve his life, "I will become him again." But the daimyo turned away. "No, the gods have changed. Their minds." The next day, his clothing was taken. He was redressed in plain gray robes. No silks, no perfume, no makeup. His hair, once maintained with care, was hacked short by a monk with dull scissors. He was stripped of name and purpose, with a speed that made the months before feel like a fever dream. When he asked where he was being taken, no one answered. When he resisted, they bound his hands. He was no longer Kiku. That role had ended. They placed him in a wooden cage beside the outer shrine. It stank of urine and old offerings. Monks passed him without looking. No food came the first day. The second day, a bowl of rice with pebbles in it. By the third, even that stopped. Insects bit his legs raw, his back ached, his throat burned from dehydration. But worse than the pain was the realization. No one remembered the boy from the forest. No one remembered Kiku. There was no name left to wear. One afternoon, he was taken from the cage. Not free, just moved. A small ceremony had been arranged in the inner courtyard. Incense burned. Monks chanted. Nobles watched from behind fans. He was made to kneel before a large altar while the head priest read from a scroll. It was a ritual of atonement. They said his impurity had disrupted the spiritual balance of the household, that his body, now unsuitable for its holy purpose, would be sealed in isolation, not death. Worst-erasure. At sunset, he was led into a stone chamber behind the shrine, a tomb repurposed for living burial, a bowl of rice, a flask of water, a candle, nothing else. The door closed with a thud. The first night, he screamed until his voice broke. No one came. The second day, he whispered his name again, and again, both of them, Ren and Kiku. By the third, he said nothing at all. Time passed, or maybe it stopped. The rice molded. The water ran out. The candle died. He dreamed of standing in a field of bones, every face he had worn staring back at him. Then, one day, the door opened, not for rescue, but for replacement. A new boy stood in the hall outside, eyes wide with fear. The resemblance was there, another face like the one Takamura had once loved. The monks nodded. Kiku was pulled from the chamber, now hollow-eyed and skeletal, and led to the old garden, not to be executed, simply put away. He was placed in a disused shed, given no tasks, no identity, just forgotten. There were no words of dismissal, only absence. He watched from a cracked door as the new Kiku was trained, dressed, taught to smile. He no longer wept. He no longer thought. He waited to dissolve. The air was always cold in the shed, even when the sun burned outside. The walls were thin, the roof patched with straw and rot. No one opened the door unless it was to throw in spoiled food or sweep out waste. Most days, there was no food at all. Just silence, the rustle of weeds, and the slow grind of time. Kiku no longer looked like the boy they once dressed in silks. His skin had turned sallow. His limbs were thin, bruised from lying on hardwood for weeks. His voice was barely more than a whisper now, and he spoke only to himself in fragment pieces of poems he no longer fully remembered. A line here, a name there, nothing whole, nothing certain. Through the slats of the door, he sometimes saw the new boy. He had the same pale face, the same tilt of the eyes, but not the same soul. Kiku watched him walk the old path, kneel before the altar, sing the court songs, bow to the daimyo. He moved with the same hesitation, the same forced grace. He cried sometimes, Kiku could tell, but only when no one was looking. The boy would learn to hide the tears soon. Kiku could not hate him. He pitied him. He wanted to scream, to warn him, but what words could help? No one escapes a memory once they are chosen to become it. Days blurred again. Then weeks. Outside the shed, things changed. Lord Takamura stopped appearing in public. Some said he had taken a vow of silence. Others claimed he had fallen ill from the grief that never left him. The priests still came and went, but with fewer chants. There were whispers of rebellion in the outer provinces. Famine was spreading. Bandits stalked the roads. Even nobles feared traveling far from their estates. But none of that reached Kiku. To the world beyond the garden, he had already ceased to exist. Once, a servant girl left a scrap of rice wrapped in cloth near the door. She didn't speak or look at him, just placed it and walked away. He ate it slowly, savoring every bite, though it was sour. It was the first act of kindness he had known in months. He never saw her again. One morning, he woke coughing blood. It tasted like metal and ash. His breath came in gasps. He knew what it meant. He had seen others with the same cough before they vanished. The sickness had come for him at last. There was no medicine, no prayer. He lay curled on the floor, staring at the cracks in the wood above, and wondered if the gods watched him now, if they had ever watched, if they had truly chosen him for this, or if men had only used their names to justify cruelty. As the fever worsened, he began to hallucinate. He saw his mother's hands brushing hair from his face, his brother laughing by the fire. He heard the river. The scent of burning rice fields filled his nose. For a moment, he forgot the castle, the silks, the rituals. Then it all came back, crushing and cold. No death came that day, nor the next, but the body does not forget suffering, and the mind does not forgive it. One evening, he awoke to the sound of shouting. Something was happening beyond the garden. Footsteps, doors slamming, screams, a sudden silence, then smoke. It crept under the walls first, a thin gray ribbon. Then it thickened. The shed filled with it. Kiku coughed violently, trying to crawl toward the door. It was locked, of course. It had always been locked. The fire spread quickly. Sparks from the stables, maybe, or maybe set on purpose someone, trying to erase the shame of this place. Kiku didn't know, didn't care. The heat rose. He pressed his body to the dirt floor, gasping. But the flames didn't reach him. Hours later, he awoke to rain and ash. The fire had been stopped before it reached his shed. He was alone. The shouting had ceased. The garden was quiet. Smoke hung in the air, but the buildings were dark, empty. No one came for him that day. No one came the next. Eventually, the door creaked open, not from kindness, but neglect. The lock had broken. He pushed it gently, and it gave way. For the first time in months, he stepped into open air. The garden was overgrown. The shrine doors hung open. Offerings rotted on the stone altar. He wandered in a daze, past fallen lanterns and cracked tiles. No voices called to him. No guards stopped him. He made his way to the inner halls, barefoot and shaking. The castle was abandoned. Furniture overturned. Scrolls scattered. A broken teacup here. A smear of blood there. No bodies, no sounds. Just the echo of a world emptied. In Lord Takamura's chamber, he found a single fan resting on the floor, its paper torn. The portrait of the dead son had been slashed with a blade. Kiku sat down before it. He didn't cry, There were no tears left. That night, he left the castle. No one stopped him. No one even noticed. He walked for days, eating grass, drinking from muddy streams,